Now we've gotten to the point where it's just algorithms and it's just pushing medications and more medications. And it goes with everything that's going on in society. Everything has just become fiat and fake.
We're
Yeah.
completely ignoring the natural healing powers of the body.
We're going up against a huge industry. And in the case of cholesterol, it's probably the biggest scam in the history of modern medicine. Blue light does not exist in nature. It only exists from sunlight. And if you're exposed to blue light after sunset, your body perceives it as if the sun is out.
If you find something like Bitcoin that gives you hope, that actually is going to have an effect on your biochemistry and potentially could protect you from chronic conditions and chronic illness.
I can't just be silent anymore.
Today on The Signal, I'm joined by Dr. Ahmad Ammous, a doctor who's helping people break free from the pharmaceutical model and reconnect with real healing. We're going to talk about how doctors like us can rebuild medicine from first principles, the same way that Bitcoin rebuilt money. Ahmad, I'm so honored to have you here on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be on your show.
Yeah, the reason that I'm so excited is because we're both hospitalists, we're both in internal medicine, we're both into Bitcoin. We're seeing massive transformations happening in both of these fields. And I've seen you on a bunch of different podcasts, and everything you're saying I just resonate very deeply with. So why don't we start with your personal journey? How did your eyes start to get open to these issues with medicine and how it's not what we thought, it's not what we signed up for, really?
Yeah, when I was in medical school, I was a first year medical student, and you remember they bring you those mock patients, like people that
Yeah.
have a certain condition, so that you see how this condition looks in people. And so I remember seeing like my first rheumatoid arthritis patient. And I looked at her joints. Her joint was just so deformed and inflamed. And so I started talking to her, and I'm like, how long you've had this condition? And she said 15 years. And are you following what the doctors are telling you? Are you taking all the medications? Are you doing the blood tests? She said, yes, I'm doing everything the doctor has told me. So that was a bit odd for me. Like, why are your joints still deformed then? And so I told her, so how much improvement have you seen with whatever the doctors have prescribed? And she told me, I've seen a 20% improvement in my symptoms. And this is for over 10 years she's had this. And it was quite a devastating moment for my young career, because I've worked so hard to get into medical school. I had to work very hard in my undergraduate studies. I had to do the MCAT, I had to do all that stuff. And I knew I still had many years ahead of me. And what's the point of doing all of this if you're not actually helping people get better? All of this just to help people improve by 20%. This is not what I signed up for. This is not the medicine that I saw myself doing growing up. I wanted to heal people, help them get rid of these conditions. And so it was quite disturbing for me. I didn't know what to do. The system is not really helping people. What do I do? Do I just quit and get out of here? I've already worked so hard to get into medical school. Should I just quit? Around the same time, luckily, I started just reading about diet on my own, and I changed my diet. I started eating more healthy, and I just felt immensely better. Even though I had no really health conditions, I just felt more energetic, better mood, more exercise ability. And it got me wondering, if this is making me feel so good, how would it make those miserable patients feel? And I started looking online for answers. And it turns out that a lot of people heal their conditions just using natural ways, using diet and natural ways of healing. And it got me wondering, so why doesn't modern medicine teach about this stuff? And that's when I understood why the system is completely corrupt and why the system is completely captured by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I started to have these same realizations just over the past few years. And it's scary because I was so plugged into the system. I've been a hospitalist for over 11 years now, and I never questioned it. It wasn't until Bitcoin really opened my eyes to see how all the stuff we're told about finance isn't true. So once I peeked behind the curtain and saw how the financial industry worked, it changed the way I look at everything. And so it changed the way I look at medicine. And I started uncovering the same things that you seem to have uncovered even before Bitcoin. So I love how these awakenings are parallel. It's your awakening wasn't necessarily tied to Bitcoin. They're all interconnected. And I love this shift that humanity and society is going through. We're all having these awakenings that are in different areas, but they all have the underlying principle that's all the same, really.
Yeah, it's the world is changing, and once a world built on fiat money is just fundamentally flawed. So once you understand that flaw, you start to see the flaws everywhere else.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about how you wanted to go into medicine because your dad was a doctor and you saw the sacred relationship that he had with his patients. But then when you got into it, you saw that the times have changed. Just in one generation, from your dad's generation to your generation, everything's different. The incentives are different, and it really changes everything. And I think that change from your dad's generation to this generation mirrors this change that society is going through, and it really just exemplifies how the world has shifted.
100%. My dad was a surgeon, a plastic surgeon, so he did a lot of work with burn patients and difficult patients, and he did a lot for them. So it's rewarding that way. It's a little bit different in primary care and hospitalist and internal medicine. But yeah, definitely medicine at his time in the 70s and 80s, they were actually helping people get better. And they were interested in trying to understand the body a little bit more. Now we've gotten to the point where it's just algorithms and it's just pushing medications and more medications. And it goes with everything that's going on in society. Everything has just become fiat and fake.
Yeah, it's powerful how you had the personal realizations with changing your diet and lifestyle, and then how you were able to see that in the hospital and with your patients, and how you've made it your mission now to bring those things together so that you can actually become a healer. But for people that aren't necessarily familiar with exactly what we're talking about, can you talk a little bit about some specific examples? I think talking about the diet guidelines and the cholesterol myth and the statin scam, those are all things that people can really relate to. And those are all things that we've just come to accept, like the food pyramid, or everyone needs to be on a statin. And all of our colleagues don't question it, they just go by it. But these are very clear examples of exactly the kind of things that we're talking about. So do you mind expanding on those things a little bit?
Yeah, dietary guidelines are very misguided. Dietary guidelines come from research laboratories in universities that they just try and analyze micronutrients and macronutrients and calories. It's not based on real life examples. They're not going out there talking to people, seeing what makes people feel better. It's all theoretical and it's all industry driven. So that's not where you should go to understand the ideal human diet. A good resource for people to learn about this is the work of someone called Weston Price. Weston Price was this dentist who, in the early 1900s, traveled the world to look at societies who haven't been touched by industrialization to see what these societies ate. At that point, there was a big interest in plant-based diet, vegan and vegetarian diets, and he actually went there to try and prove that our ancestors usually ate vegan and vegetarian diets. What he actually discovered is that in all these societies, all over the world, throughout the continents of the world, what they shared in common is that the staple of their diet was animal meat and fat. That was always what the cornerstone of the diet was, along with things on the side that seasonally grow in these environments. Of course, there was no processed food, there was no sugar, there was no white flour, there were no vegetable seed oils. But with the advent of fiat money, there became many incentives for the government and for institutions to tell us to eat fiat food. One of these incentives is because inflation was going up so much with money printing, costs of food was going up. And so in order to hide inflation, a smart way they did that was to change what the recommended dietary intake for a specific family or a specific person per day is. So instead of telling you to eat meat every day, they tell you to eat meat 3 times a week. So that cuts down the groceries that you have to buy for a week, and it's a way to hide inflation. At the same time, who jumped on this also? Then the processed food industry, because if you're telling people not to eat meat, the alternative is processed industrial crap like vegetable seed oils, which have a long shelf life and therefore have high profit margins to make. And so it was driven by fiat money, fiat government propaganda, and industrialized food and processed food industry to try and push us away from what our ancestors used to eat. And the repercussions have been atrocious for our health and for our understanding of what the human body actually needs.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down. And just another personal example, like with my dad, he just had a heart surgery. He had a bypass, and they put him on a statin, and his cholesterol levels weren't actually even elevated. And so this is just a personal example to highlight what you're talking about with just blindly following guidelines and how statins have become so prevalent. And we see all the incentives behind that. But like with my dad, he's noticing side effects. He's noticing that his thinking is more foggy. There's sexual side effects from being on this statin, and his cholesterol level is not even elevated. And so he turns to me and says, "Hey, should I take the statin?" And I say, "I probably wouldn't take it. You're having these side effects. You don't even need it." But it's hard for him to reconcile, because he's like, "Why is my cardiologist telling me I need to be on it? And my internal medicine is telling me I need to be on it." So it's hard for people to reconcile this. If people of authority are telling them one thing, but then common sense, which is what you and I are espousing, it's hard for them to make that connection.
Yeah, we're going up against a huge industry. And in the case of cholesterol, it's probably the biggest scam in the history of modern medicine. And the scam was propagated by cholesterol lowering medication industry and the processed food industry. So the story, and I'll break it down for people, it started in the 1950s when the rates of heart disease were all of a sudden increasing in the US. And all the top researchers started looking for answers of what might be causing this. One researcher by the name of Ansel Keys published a study that was called the 7-country study. And he looked at the rates of heart disease for 7 countries compared to their intake of saturated animal fat, and saw that as saturated fat intake increased, the risk of heart disease increased. Everybody saw that this study was a breakthrough. Cholesterol became public enemy number one. Everyone was told to avoid butter, avoid meat, avoid animal fats. And who jumped on those studies? People who were making vegetable seed oils. So soy, bean oil, corn oil, safflower oil, all these oils that are very cheap to make and have a very high profit margin. They were being advertised as low cholesterol alternatives to all this animal fat that's causing you heart disease. A brilliant model. They became the staple fat in all American households. The lie was propagated even further because in the 1960s and 1970s, results from the Framingham study was this community in Massachusetts, a small town, where these people were generally very healthy. So they went and started to study their lifestyle, their dietary choices. They ran labs on them and followed them through the years. Initial results from the study showed that, maybe people with higher cholesterol are at an increased risk of getting heart attacks. And so the pharmaceutical industry jumped on these results and started looking for medications to lower cholesterol. And that's when they invented statins. Statins are actually based on fungal toxins. They were invented they saw that fungi, when they attack certain liver cells, they reduce the cholesterol levels there. And that's how they invented the structure of the statin. And it was the first drug in history to be prescribed just based on a lab test, not based on any symptoms or any health conditions that you can have. And it also built on this animal fat is bad for you, cholesterol is bad for you. And it became just a huge industry, and it became the highest selling drug in history.
Yeah.
One final thing. Later in the 80s, they followed up the results of the Framingham study, and they showed actually having lower cholesterol increased your mortality and decreased longevity in general. So the initial results were just meaningless.
Yeah, it's crazy when you hear stories like this and see what goes on behind the scenes and all the incentives behind basically how we practice medicine. There's all these perverse incentives, and it's really disillusioning because we've dedicated our whole life to this, and then you realize that we've just been indoctrinated essentially. And I love how you draw these connections and these parallels. In another podcast, you talked about a really good connection between how when the money gets centralized, how it spills over into everything downstream, including medicine, and you link it to the Flexner Report. I really liked how you drew that connection. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that talk about the problems in healthcare. We don't want pharmaceutical industry controlling everything. We don't want big agriculture control of dietary guidelines, all this stuff. But nobody actually discusses, so why did this happen? What enables this to happen? And the best explanation I came up with is all of these organizations, like the American Medical Association, the American Dietary Association, the American Diabetes Association, they all started in the early 1900s. The AMA actually in 1903. What happened at that time that Bitcoiners are very interested in? In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act came about, and the Federal Reserve was created in 1917. And the Federal Reserve is just a tool that enabled government to have a lot of money and a lot of power. They centralized all the money. They are able to print money out of nowhere. And this, for the first time, allowed governments to build an agenda, pursue their agenda, regardless of whether people gave them money or not. They had all the money they wanted. And this was the same time that the Flexner Report was created. And the Flexner Report was written by the American Medical Association. And the purpose of this report was the standardization of medical education in the US. It sounds good on paper that we want the process to be standardized and follow the same guidelines everywhere. But what it actually was, it enabled pharmaceutical control of medical education, where any medical school that was not based on pharmaceutical medicine was shut down, and medical schools were only allowed to teach pharmaceutical medicine. So more than 60% of US medical schools were shut down at that point. And ever since, medicine healing is just based on medications and how the Federal Reserve enabled it.
This idea of the type of medicine that we're practicing, how it's being dictated to us, it's not natural at all. I love how you draw those connections to where it comes from. And it makes me question my whole life, really. If I'm questioning pharmaceutical-based medicine, I'm realizing that we've just been indoctrinated to think that every symptom, everything that could go wrong in the human body needs a pill. That's the way that I've been taught to think. But when you pull that back a little bit, you realize that it's so artificial what we're doing. We're putting these artificial pharmaceutical synthetic pills in our bodies. If you just take a small step backwards, you realize just how wrong that is and how we're completely ignoring the natural healing powers of the body. We're ignoring natural medicine, homeopathic medicine, osteopathic medicine. We're ignoring all these types of medicine that have been around for way longer than pharmaceutical. Pharmaceutical is a new thing, and we call these other things alternative medicine, when really those are the things that have been around for hundreds of years. Our thinking is just so backward on this, and I'm having to relearn what real healing actually is. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you, because I think we're at the forefront of this. We need to create, what does true healing really mean, and how can we provide that to people on a mass level?
100%. There also, something to point out is there's nothing wrong with pharmaceutical companies coming up with new medications. Medications help people in certain conditions. There are certain conditions that need medications. There are certain emergencies that need medications. But if you are claiming that medications are just a lot more successful than these alternative quackery schools of healing, why do you need to suppress them? Why do you need to shut down their medical schools? And you realize that's where the corruption is. In a free market, pharmaceutical meds would be competing with all these healing modalities. You as a patient can go to an allopathic modern doctor, or can go to an osteopath, and see what works for you. And that's a free market process, and everyone gets to benefit. It's going to be exciting once we break down this Fiat system, where we'll get a re-emergence of these traditional schools of healing and get to combine everything we've learned from pharmaceutical and allopathic medicine. And the possibilities are endless, and it's quite exciting how much healing and how much we'll be able to help people with all the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, so for doctors like us who went through the traditional route and are finally coming to these realizations, what do you recommend? Should we start getting certified in like holistic medicine or functional medicine? Or kind of the whole idea behind Bitcoin is that certifications don't really mean anything. It's all about proof of work. So what is our proof of work going to be? How are we going to be able to showcase and demonstrate that the ideas that we're talking about are a better way to go than traditional medicine?
Yeah, this is a question that I haven't fully answered even for myself. I'm still working on teaching myself things that work and experimenting on my body, etc. I mean, just general guidelines is also like getting a certification doesn't really mean much. A lot of also alternative and functional medicine, they also struggle with they still look at things from an allopathic perspective where, a pill for every ill, which is not how the body works. A good place to start for every physician is be curious about your own body. Start experimenting with your own diet, with your own exercise routine, with your own light exposure, with your own exposure to the sunlight, and see what works for you. And start experimenting with your own self. And the curiosity that you have about your own body is going to lead you to research certain things. And that's how you pick up topics and on people that are experts in these topics. And that's how you build your knowledge base. And you don't have to be the master of quantum biology or the master of low carb diets in order to help people. You just need to know a little bit more than the average Joe, which because you've already studied anatomy, you've already studied a lot of medicine, you already have an advantage to the average Joe. And so combine that with a little bit of curiosity and learning what actually works for your body and what's worked for other people. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And I know you talk a lot about healing and aligning healing with natural law. Can you talk about some of the core principles that you found in your research in moving away from traditional medicine?
Yeah, diet is very important. What you eat in your body becomes you. So you want to be supplying your body with all the micro and macronutrients that it needs. You want to be eating healthy from your environment. You want to be careful about the source of food that you're getting. So that's a very important principle in that. And a lot of the patients that we see in the hospital, you see how shitty their diet is. And you know that how much they'll be better if they're eating whole, unprocessed food, especially if it's animal-based. That's usually the most beneficial for them. And it's shocking to see 80-year-olds in the hospital. They eat Cheerios for breakfast and sandwiches for lunch. And that's why they're in the hospital every 2 months. They're not getting any sort of nutrition, and their body starts to break down because of it. I think diet is something a lot of people are becoming aware of. I think an aspect of healing that not many people talk about is light. We, in the last 20 years, have had a change in our light environment that our bodies have never seen in history. We're under artificial blue LED light all day, every day, even at night. And your body's ability to generate energy, the way your mitochondria generate energy, depends on you getting the right light signals. So that's something very important to be aware of. And the best way to fix that is to try and be out in the sun as much as possible. Make sure you're getting enough morning sunlight, and to try and minimize the artificial light that you're getting after sunset. These are all just early steps to understand the effects of light on your body. And if you start to apply those, you'll see the effects of it. You'll see how it feels like when you don't see the sunlight. And if you're under artificial light all day, you'll start to feel the effects of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for those tips. It's a good place to start with the nutrition and light. And I know you talk a little bit about the blue light blocking glasses. Are those something that you recommend for people?
Yes, I don't usually recommend random gadgets and gizmos for people because a lot of them are a waste of money. But if there's one thing that people should look into, blue blocking glasses, you want to get the ones that are dark orange or red. And what these do is block the rays of blue light that come into your eyes after sunset. The electromagnetic spectrum, there's a visible region, and in the visible region, the highest energy rays are blue light. Blue light does not exist in nature. It only exists from sunlight. And if you're exposed to blue light after sunset, your body perceives it as if the sun is out. So if sunset comes and you turn on all the lights in the house, all of a sudden your body thinks it's noon again. And that sort of changes all your hormonal signals in the body. And the most important part to protect from this artificial light after sunset is your eyes. So these glasses help a lot with setting your circadian rhythm in a more natural way.
I've started to use them. Definitely noticed a difference as well. So yeah, I love that actionable tips that people can start doing now. And just the general idea of just being in alignment with natural law, try to rise with the sun and go to bed earlier, just intuitive things that a lot of people overlook. Are there other actionable steps that you've taken in your life that you think would be good for patients to take?
Yeah, exercise.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misconceptions about exercise. You don't need to be in the gym every day. It's probably not great for you also if you're in the gym every day. You want to be getting at least 1 day of strength training, of resistance training, whether it's with weights, whether it's with body weights, and maybe another day where you're doing some sort of movement, cardio, and you want to try and be walking every day. Take at least a 20-minute walk every day. Our ancestors in the wild, if you were sedentary for a very long time, that meant you're a very easy target for prey, or you're going to lose all the food that's around you. You're going to run out of food soon. So our bodies naturally want you to get out and move. And that's why it feels good to move. And if you're just stuck in a desk all day, it's not going to be good for your body or for your mental health.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And I know that you are starting to build stuff outside of your traditional job. Can you talk a little bit about what service you offer, how you see that evolving into the future?
Yeah, as I told you, I struggled a lot in medical school because I didn't want to continue with the system that was actively harming people. But I stuck with it because I wanted to get the credentials so that people know that I know what I'm talking about. And I've continued to work in the hospital, which I still do now, but I also have my own online practice where I see patients online. I see people that want a perspective, a natural perspective on their disease. They don't want the traditional perspective of pills or surgery. They want something different. And I talk to people online, I follow up with them online, and people have just, the feedback I get is, wow, this is unlike anything we ever talked to. And I think the best way to kind of break down the old system is to build a new one that works better. And so if all of us start to work on our own projects, our own, doesn't have to be seeing patients, it could be education, it could be platforms like podcasts. These things are gonna slowly attract more and more people, that people are gonna start going there rather than going to the old system that's crumbling and not helping anyone.
Yeah, thank you for setting such a good example and actually building something and showing that proof of work. Because that's something I'm struggling with now. I'm having all the same realizations that you're having, but I'm still stuck in that Fiat job. And I think a lot of people are in this space. One of the guys I interviewed calls it the liminal space, where we're breaking free from the old, but the new hasn't quite emerged yet. So we're stuck in this liminal intermediate space. And a lot of times I think I need to just leave my current job and just go full force into creating something like what you're doing. But then sometimes I think maybe there is a role for us to be intermediaries and be the bridge between this old Fiat world and this new world. And it sounds like you're doing that too, but what's your thoughts completely breaking free versus being that intermediary?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it. I still learn from my hospital job. I've only been a
Yeah.
hospitalist for a few years, so I still
Mhm.
learn by doing that. And it's different seeing people in person than seeing people online. So
Right.
that's a different thing. I think you need to have something on the side, though, that either
Mhm.
you're learning on the side or working something on the side. But how much you want to dedicate to each also depends on how big is your stack of Bitcoin. It's person to
Yeah,
person.
right.
You definitely, if you understand this, then you have the responsibility to try and educate people and try and learn more and to help people escape the system. The earlier, the better you are at helping people get out of the system.
Yeah, thank you. That's very good advice. And what would you tell younger doctors or people contemplating going into medicine or currently in residency, knowing what you know now? Would you tell them to still go down the route of traditional medical school?
If you haven't gone to med school yet, I would reconsider, to be honest. There are other more rewarding careers out there, and it's a difficult profession, and it's really difficult when the tools that you are working with don't help people that much. So they should just be aware of that before they go into it. I would tell them to
Yeah.
reconsider it. If you've already started and you're in training, then continue. Definitely, if you're already in med school, then continue. It's worth it to have the credentials. But on the side, make sure that you're being curious. Make sure you're listening to podcasts that are opening your mind to how alternative people are seeing health and disease. And that's going to help you a lot if you're in training to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's really good advice. If someone's called to be a healer, what alternative routes would you suggest, or do you think would be better than going down the traditional route?
Yeah, there are alternative schools of healing. Your family and society is not going to be as proud of you for
Yeah.
being a naturopath or a homeopath.
Hmm.
But if you actually work hard on it and if you take time to study on your own as well, you can become very good at actually healing people. And if you also combine that with some sort of online platform where people can find you online, you can go a very long way. And it can become as rewarding or even more rewarding than traditional medicine. So naturopathy is a way. There are naturopath schools. Homeopathy is another way. Even chiropractic is, there's a little bit more clinical utility to it because you're actually helping people feel better with your own hands than just giving pills. So these are things to consider. If you really want to be a free spirit and you'd rather not spend the money, then you could really just, if you want to sit down and learn on YouTube and on the internet, you can teach yourself a lot of ways to help people feel better. And if you start putting content out there, people are going to come be attracted to you.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good tips. Yeah, thank you very much. It's very refreshing to hear your takes on everything because I resonate deeply with everything you're saying. And the fact that we have the same job and we likely see a lot of the same things. I'm curious, are you seeing any of your colleagues start to open up to these ideas at all? Because it's very difficult. I feel like there's no one around me that I can talk to about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely not. In med school, it was really depressing for me because I was
Mhm.
going through some dietary changes. I was feeling so good. I would just go to my friends and curiously tell them, "Oh, I don't eat sugar and I feel so much better." They're like, "What's wrong with this guy? Are you crazy? What's wrong with you? You think diet is going to make you feel so much better?" And ever since, I've been very hesitant to talk to anyone, and especially know physicians, especially are very. There's something about physicians where we're just very not open-minded. I don't talk to them about alternative health stuff. I don't talk to them about Bitcoin. Some people get curious because they see my stuff online and they come to me for questions. I answer their questions, but that's it. I think doctors are probably going to be the last people to understand what's going on with the entire system. And I actually think the profession of medicine kind of selects for people that are less curious and better able to just follow commands and sit down and study. So I don't have that much hope for my fellow physicians, unfortunately.
That's an interesting take because I never really thought about it like that. I thought that doctors would be more likely to see this kind of stuff. So it's been very disillusioning for me to see that they're not open to it. But do you also think that applies to Bitcoin? Do you think doctors are less able to see Bitcoin as well because they're less open minded?
It's just, there's this thing, like, I'm sure you see it in the hospital where they just read the headline of, oh, these stupid people want to take ivermectin, or that's their level of curiosity with everything. And even it seems with finances and with money and with Bitcoin, they just read the headline and the headline from CNN or something, and that's all they care about. They are also in a position where they are overworked. They do have a lot of loans to pay off. And so at a certain level, you can understand. But also, I think the profession of medicine, if you remember from our undergraduate days, in pre med days, you had hundreds of people that wanted to be doctors back then. And slowly, a lot of them started to filter out. And the people that filtered out are the people that tended to be a little bit more curious, maybe more entrepreneurial, maybe would consider other career options, or they're less good at just sitting down and studying and following commands. So I think by the time you're an attending, the people that are beside you have just gone through so many layers and they are the least able to just consider things from an open-minded perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting how you point that out. Yeah, I remember in my undergrad as a freshman, everyone was pre med, everyone was in general chemistry, And then it was general chemistry that kind of filters people out, and then you slowly filter more and more people out. And I remember I almost got filtered out because I was more interested in psychology, and I was more drawn to those classes. And I actually stopped being pre-med for a year, but then I ended up going back. But maybe looking back, it would have been better if I had been filtered out.
Yeah, it's a journey. At least at this point, you kind of understand. I'd much rather know that I'm in a corrupt specialty than actually not know.
Yeah.
So at least we know.
Are you worried about some of the stuff that you're talking about online? Are you worried about any blowback with your employer?
Yeah, at this point, I know I've thought about it for a long time. I thought
Yeah.
that I shouldn't talk about it. But at this point, if I get big enough that my employer is going to fire me, then I think at
Yeah,
that
that's a
point,
good
my
one.
online business would be big
Yeah.
enough
Yeah.
that, and it's a leap of faith, but I can't just be silent anymore. And there's also, I'm a little bit sensitive about certain topics that I don't discuss. I leave it up to people who are not employed by hospitals.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think we have a duty to talk about this. Once you see it, it's our obligation and duty to humanity to at least share what we see. I'm curious, what are the things that you think we need to shy away from and be careful about talking about?
Yeah, going back to that, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago even, talking about any of the stuff that we're talking about was considered like it would really get you into trouble. But now even RFK is out there talking about these things, and it's very hard for the system to keep track of who's actually
Yeah.
talking, who's dissenting. So that's a good thing. Two major topics in medicine that are huge scams, and there's a lot of misinformation around them. Number one is cancer and cancer treatment. That's a huge rabbit hole that is very controversial, and there's a lot of quacks out there, but there's also a lot of misinformation about what actually works for cancer. And then the other one is vaccinations. So those are two big topics that generally you should not be talking about them too much because they will get you in trouble.
Yeah, thank you for those tips. I'm still new and trying to navigate because it sounds like if you just mentioned something, you could get your channel shut down. And so it's good to be aware of the different pitfalls and what to avoid. Talking about the pandemic also is something that you have to be careful about.
Now it's become one of these topics, it's not that big of a deal.
What was your experience like with the pandemic, and what was your takeaway in terms of how it all went down?
I was a resident in New York City. I saw some crazy stuff. What most people don't know, once this happened, we still hadn't had any COVID patients. For a week or two, the hospital was completely empty. And then we had this influx of COVID patients where the entire hospital was COVID patients. In retrospect, what we were doing wrong was everybody was getting a ventilator, even though later we showed that we were over-oxygenating these people, and that led to complications. Nobody was getting those alternative treatments that now have proven to be effective for some people. And so we survived that peak. It was around maybe 3 or 4 weeks where the hospital was very busy. And then we might have had 1 or 2 months of the hospital was again very empty. Then what happened is the hospital became super busy and with a lot of very similar conditions, which included myocardial infarctions, brain bleeds, strokes. And why were we seeing all of these all of a sudden? Your traditional doctors doesn't talk about this, but these were all side effects from the vaccinations. And since that time up till now, hospitals have just been on brim anywhere I go. Like every state that I've worked in, hospitals are just at capacity. They don't have any beds, and people don't seem to get better. And I think it's all repercussions of that.
Yeah, it's crazy that we lived through that and we were on the front lines of that, and how society seems to have just forgotten about it, even though it was just 5 years ago.
It's pretty wild. And the way the things that happened then were framed is the way history will look back at it. And the narrative has just already been set for the future so that we move on and we forget about all the disasters that happened then.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about it like that. But I really appreciate hearing your perspective and your takes. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think, yeah, for young doctors, it's easy to just be depressed and black-pilled about everything, but there is hope. If you know about Bitcoin, you already have a way to save money so that you can get out of the system sooner than your colleagues. That's a great thing. If you have Bitcoin, you'll have more time to think about other ways you want to help people. And so just teach yourself about Bitcoin, follow people online that are giving you helpful medical information to grow your knowledge. They don't have to be doctors, they can be just random influencers. Don't trust the degrees, trust the knowledge that you're getting. And yeah, don't be depressed about this. There's a way out.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good way to end it because, yeah, I don't want people to be left with that feeling of the black pill and there's no hope. There's a tremendous amount of hope, and especially with Bitcoin. This intersection between Bitcoin and health and medicine is so powerful, and things are not looking good now, but that's what happens when you start to see the flaws. They start to come to the surface. So that's what's happening now. And it was necessary for us to have this awakening and for all of these flaws to be brought to the surface. So now we can address them, and now we can create a system that's much better. And I think Bitcoin's going to play a huge role in that. A thought I had recently is about how we often talk about how Bitcoin just causes you to have a lot of hope. I've recently started to go down this rabbit hole of how your feelings and your emotions can influence your health because it influences different genetic pathways that get activated and different protein expression. So if you find something like Bitcoin that gives you hope, that actually is going to have an effect on your biochemistry and potentially could protect you from chronic conditions and chronic illness. And I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza, but he talks a lot about the power of meditation. And meditation alone can boost your immune system. He's done studies where people that just had a daily meditation practice were able to essentially make themselves immune from COVID. So there's a lot of powerful stuff.
Yeah. The power of the unconscious mind is something that all societies historically looked into. That's why we had religions. That's why we had astrology. That's why we had people looking into their dreams. That's why the field of psychology is invented. And this is unfortunately something that modern medicine just completely ignores. But it's very powerful. So many of the diseases, the physical diseases that we see are diseases of the mind to start with. And yeah, Bitcoin is great in that way because you can see the hope, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that can have emotional and physical effect on you.
Yeah, it also ties into the idea of the placebo effect, which is incredibly powerful. And it always blows my mind how even doctors and people in medicine just completely ignore how powerful the placebo effect is. Like a lot of studies that they do, they'll give people a sugar pill that doesn't even have active pharmaceutical ingredient in it. And it often has the exact same effect as actually having the actual pill. That just shows how powerful our minds are.
Yeah, most physicians, they know this inherently without even practicing it. But how much different is it when you approach the patient with a smile and you talk to them about their family and they like you as a person? How easy it is for them to get better? How sooner did they get better? All of these things. And you're working on their unconscious. And these things are a lot more powerful than any pill or any treatment or any surgery.
Yeah, thanks so much again for coming on. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do in the future and looking forward to staying connected with you.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. You as well.
Right. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to stop recording it, but I don't want to end the meeting.
Oh.
Okay, here we go. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of The Signal. In a world drowning in noise, signal is everything. Most people are overwhelmed, distracted, and deceived, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've lost the ability to discern what truly matters. But signal cuts through the noise. And Bitcoin is pure signal. It doesn't promise. It doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to opinion or propaganda. It just is. And as the world descends into even more chaos, distraction, and distortion, your ability to identify signal, to recognize what's real, true, and timeless will be one of your greatest assets. So stay sharp, stay sovereign, stay tuned, because here on The Signal, we don't follow trends, we follow truth. I'm Dr. Satoshi, and in a world of noise, we are the signal.